Hello and welcome to the third lecture for Unit 7. We will be covering two more principles of the Constitution, and those will be separation of powers and checks and balances. They kind of go hand in hand with each other. But if you remember from the last lecture, we talked about federalism. And in federalism, you have, an amount of power that is split between the federal government and the state governments. So you have kind of the Venn diagram with, this certain amount of stuff over here, this certain amount of stuff over here, state, national, and then stuff in the middle as well. But what we're doing here is we're taking this side right here, this national government side, and, moving it over here, having this list of powers, but then separating those into different groups, so that way we get three sections, and that's where we get the three branches of government, and that's what separation of powers really is. So like I said, the separation of powers is a division of government into three branches of government, and this principle is designed to prevent the leaders of the government from abusing too much power, because if one group of people had all the powers of the government, they could do anything they wanted. And in this situation, we have separate powers for separate groups of people that hopefully can't abuse them. This makes sure that each branch cannot become too powerful. The three branches of government are the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. They are all established and explained in the first three articles or parts of the United States Constitution. This is kind of what we're looking at with separation of powers. You have the legislative branch, which is Congress, Senate, House of Representatives. They make the laws. You have the executive branch, which is the president and his cabinet, which we will talk about later, and they enforce the laws. Judicial branch is the Supreme Court, the judges. They interpret or judge the laws. And these are all things that you kind of need to focus on. You need to know, that what you're seeing here is that these people over here in the legislative branch has a certain amount of power. These people have a certain amount of power in the executive branch, and the judicial branch has a certain amount of power, and they all work together to make sure that each of them don't gain too much power. Article 1 of the Constitution talks about the legislative branch. Article 1 sets up Congress as the legislative branch, and Congress is made up of two houses or groups, and that is the Senate and the House of Representatives. And we've talked about what the House and the Senate are and how many representatives you get in each and all that kind of stuff. The framers of the Constitution place great importance on Congress. You can tell because it's the first branch mentioned in the Constitution. The workings of Congress in the first article are described in greater detail than either of the other two branches of the federal government. And the other two branches must depend on Congress for the money that they need to carry out their responsibilities. So, the reason that they did this is because if you think about it, the legislative branch, Congress, is filled with the people that the people of the United States elect. And that means that this branch is the closest to the people of the United States. So the framers wanted to give the power to the people, and by doing these things, making sure that they describe it in great detail and all this kind of stuff, that's what they're doing. The second article of the Constitution talks about the executive branch. The second article sets up the president and their cabinet as the executive branch. A cabinet is like his top group of advisors that help him with his other responsibilities, and we will get to that in the next unit. It is responsible, the executive branch is, for seeing that the nation's laws are carried out and enforced. The president, who is the nation's chief executive, is the head or the top of the executive branch, and the executive branch also includes the vice president and the cabinet of advisors, which help him with his executive duties. The judicial branch is outlined in Article 3. The Constitution talks about the judicial branch because it sets up the judges and the courts as the judicial branch. These, remember, are going to be interpreting the laws. The top of the judicial branch would be the Supreme Court. The judicial branch interprets the laws and decides punishments for lawbreakers. And in case you aren't aware, like if you are arrested, the police don't decide how long you should stay in jail. If you're arrested, you go on trial, and if you're found guilty, the judge then interprets how badly you broke the law and how much time you should spend in jail. So, you kill someone. Okay, you should probably spend your life in jail, right? I mean, that's probably what you're thinking. But what if the circumstances of that happening is you were driving, a deer ran out in front of your car, you swerved, missed it, you weren't really paying attention all the way, and you struck another person's vehicle and they died. Now, that's not really, murder that you spend the rest of your life in. That's kind of like a manslaughter, and that you shouldn't really spend, the rest of your life in jail or get the death penalty or anything like that. You should face consequence, but maybe not that severe. The Constitution gives Congress the power to set up the lower federal courts to help carry out the work of the judicial branch. The Supreme Court is the top of the judicial branch, and they declare if a law is unconstitutional or invalid, and if it is in conflict with the Constitution. In your book, if you look on page 270, you will see how a bill becomes a law. And there are a lot of steps. And if it goes through all the steps and it becomes a law, the Supreme Court can still say that it's unconstitutional if it violates the people's rights. And this brings us into the next portion of the lecture, which is checks and balances. The Supreme Court being able to rule that law unconstitutional gives them power over the other laws, or over the other branches, because if the other branches are trying to make a law that is too powerful or takes away too much power from the people, the Supreme Court can step in and say, no, this is unconstitutional, you guys don't get this much power, we're not going to let you make that law. So to make sure that no branch of the federal government becomes too powerful, a system of checks and balances was included in the Constitution. Each branch of the government has powers that limit the powers of the other two branches. For example, the Supreme Court making laws unconstitutional, but also the other branches, like the legislative branch, like Congress has a power to check the president's actions. Like if the president is doing something crazy, like making everyone hang a frame portrait of himself above their fireplace or their TV or whatever, that's kind of violating people's rights. So Congress can step in and say, well, you're not doing a very good job. This is something that is kind of overreaching your powers. We are going to impeach you. And that is a check that the legislative branch has on the executive branch. Now, the executive branch also has a check on the legislative branch. If the legislative branch is making a law that is unconstitutional and the president thinks that it takes too much power away from the people, then he can veto that law, and then it will not, because he has to sign a law before it becomes official. And if he vetoes it, it does not become official, so it would stop that law from being made if he felt that it took too many rights away from the people. No other branch can take powers away from the others, so what the powers they have, that's what they have. Because of this, the powers of the government are balanced by being divided. And that's a big key of how our government works. Our government is, balanced because no one group has too much power, and if a group is taking too much power than they deserve, the other branches put them in their place. So that's separation of powers and checks and balances.